Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Phillips. First of all, before I dive in, thank you so much, Joanne and the Nerman Museum staff, for having me out here. This is an absolute blast, and I love Kansas City. I'm a painter and a draftsman. I'm based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I don't get out here enough, so thank you for an excuse to come over. This is a body of work titled Killing the Negative. And this body of work started when I stumbled on this photograph by Walker Evans in an archive. Most of my work is about exploring archives and diving into underlooked or underseen images. And this is a photograph, as I said, by Walker Evans. It's part of the Farm Security Administration's collection of photographs, the commissioned photographs from the Great Depression. And when I first saw this image, I actually thought it was a John Baldessari piece I'd never seen. And then I zoomed in and I realized that there was, the black dot on the surface was actually a hole punch through the film negative. And this led me into a body of work that has been ongoing now for almost 5 years. Before we get to the actual artwork, you're gonna have to sit through a little bit of a history lesson. I apologize. So most of you, if you close your eyes and you think of the Great Depression, you likely think of Dorothea Lange's migrant mother photograph right here. Likely one of the most significant photographs taken on American soil and maybe the defining image of the Great Depression. And what a lot of folks don't know is the background behind this image. This image was shot as part of the Farm Security Administration's photographs that were commissioned by the Roosevelt administration as part of the New Deal. And these images were shot all over the country. They were shot by 15 different photographers over the course of almost 12 years. And I stumbled on the previous image, the Walker Evans photograph, and I stumbled on a subset of these images that I did not know about. I knew about these photographs, so I did not know that there was one man in a dark room whose name was Roy Stryker, ironically enough, who his job was to send the photographers out, and then his job was to decide which images would be published. And as a part of this body of work, I've spent now the past 5 years exploring the 5,000 or so photographs that still exist that were hole punched. And so this is not a photograph, this is a drawing here. This image never existed outside of a film negative, so it only ever existed at a scale of about this big, and it was hole punched right through the middle. I became fascinated with these images because they really dove immediately into questions of truth and power. We're living in a moment right now where I think a lot of those questions around the truthfulness of images are deeply important, and they echo deeply in our contemporary narratives. But this body of work started with this image here. This is Killed Negative number 13. It started with a study for this and eventually this drawing. And I fell in love with these images. I fell in love with the questions that they brought up, and I fell in love with particularly the question of power. This image here is obviously of an African-American man, and there's a sense of violence in the removal of this image from the narrative. As I was saying, these photographs are about 170,000 of them in the current collection. However, there were actually about 300,000 that were shot. So almost half of the images that were shot as part of the Farm Security Administration's, the photographs that were shot were actually edited out by Roy Stryker. And what would happen is he would send photographers out into the world and he would say, go shoot this particular project over here, and they would mail their film negatives back to him in the darkroom without ever seeing what images were there. And then he would develop them and he would hole punch the ones he didn't like. And it's just such a powerful metaphor. It's such a powerful metaphor for power. Pardon the double power word there, but it's such a fascinating and powerful conversation because you had one man in a darkroom deciding what truth was. I think I have too many slides here, so I'm going to skip forward quickly. Here's my studio last fall as I was preparing for a solo exhibition with this work. This body of work initially started out as just drawings, and then a poet friend of mine who is a fellow in the Tulsa Artist Fellowship named Quraysh Ali Lansana, he wandered into my studio when I was working on this piece, and he said, "Who is that man?" And I said, I don't know who that man is. Because this image was hole-punched, we have no information about who this man was. And I was starting on the drawings at that point, just barely starting. He said, well, these images need text as well. So I'm going to read his poem here that he wrote about this image. We ended up publishing a book about this work. There are 27 poems and almost 100 drawings and paintings in the book, and this is one of the poems that was part of that book. Hospitality by Quraysh Ali Lansana. What rain must come for a black man to wet? What sound makes us fall? The deep rivers of my hands, dry creeks my forehead. To Arkansas heat I long to forget. Seed won't take to tears. I beg heaven to weep. New life in scent of sky, sobs on musty earth. We are drought and flood, thunder and drench, downpour and light. My knees callous dirt as my eyes to the stranger, blessing in my blood dressed in wisdom not my own, but not yours. I am this moment, this life. Who are you to pause my sun up with your whiteness in picture box, to demand stillness in a land that little rewards idle? You offer no food for my grandsons' mouths, no shelter from raging wind. Every day the sun is angry. This coat, tired as my hope, starving little ones on my brow, harvest, a dream buried in dust. Good day, sir. And I wish I could take some more time to read some of these poems. The book is available, it's out now, and it has some poems that are truly mind-blowing. I'm not a writer, and I hope I didn't botch that reading too much, but some of the poets are Joy Harjo, the U.S. Poet Laureate, Quraysh Ali Lansana, Jackie Shelton Green, she's a North Carolina Poet Laureate, and it's a really fascinating conversation between these images and trying to enter a little bit into some of the questions that perhaps these subjects in these images might have asked. Because of the way that these images were edited, they were never, we don't know who they are, we don't know anything about who is in them, and so the point of the poetry was to try to dive into that meta-narrative and get a sense of perhaps what the subject might have been thinking. And at their root, these drawings are about truth and power and representation. They bring up unavoidable questions about the power that a single white man had to define the narrative of an entire nation. These photographs, whether we think about them cognizantly now in this way or not, they defined the Great Depression, which is perhaps one of the most pivotal moments in American history, and more particularly, they defined what the government's response to that was. When we think of Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother photograph, we don't really think about it as a political image, but it was actually commissioned by the Roosevelt administration not to show what was happening, but to sell the New Deal to the American public, because the New Deal was not a political act that had to have happened. In fact, Roosevelt was 2 votes away from being impeached because of the New Deal. And I think we think about that moment now, we go, oh, Social Security, that had to have happened. Medicare, that had to have happened. They're embedded in the way that we think about America, but those were political acts in response to this moment, and these images were created to sell that moment. And yet, there was one white man in a dark room deciding what the America was that was being sold. And I find that to be a really powerful, fascinating, and important juxtaposition. The drawings bring up fascinating questions about what the purpose of a photograph is. The reason that they were edited is often the question that I think about. Why did he choose this one to publish, and then why did he destroy this other one? With this image, for example, it has an obvious underexposure, which in the moment that it was shot, when it was theoretically a documentarian or a propagandistic image, that meant that it was not doing its purpose. It was not communicating what was meant to be communicated, and yet now, in the context of a fine artwork, that flaw becomes the power of the image in a lot of ways. And I find that to be something that's really fascinating. We are living in a moment where we're questioning a lot of things about photography and image making and the records that they create and the ways that those affect our conversations. And that conversation about what a photograph is, and in particular whether a photograph can ever be truthful, is the root of all of my work. After about 3 years in this work, woke up one morning and I realized I really wanted one of these images to be read. At that point, I'd never touched a paintbrush. I had only ever drawn, and so I didn't know how to draw at all, or paint, excuse me. And but I woke up one morning. I thought I really want to see this image read, and that led me into a subset of this body of work that led to the piece that's downstairs today. And I didn't know at first why I wanted them to be read, but in retrospect, I think it was two things. I think it was the fact that in a dark room, to keep an image from being overexposed or the light-sensitive negatives from being exposed, there's often just a single red light bulb. And I started out in my career as an artist in a dark room, and there's something very visceral about that I wanted to connect to. And then there's also something very violent about the act of censorship. That hole punch in many of the images feels like a bullet hole, or it feels like a wound. And in this one here, it also sort of doubles as a eclipsed sun, which I find to be really, really striking. I find these images to be particularly important in today's moment. We're living through something right now, I think, as a human species that's really fascinating, where we, for many good reasons, do not trust the truth of any images that we see. With the inception of Photoshop and editing, and now with artificial intelligence and its ability to create images, we quite rightfully don't trust the truth of any images that we see. And that's a really hard thing to think through and figure out how do we process. I mean, we don't have any way of telling truth from fiction, and we question the truth of everything we see, and that crops up in almost every conversation we have with each other, particularly political conversations around truth and fiction. And for me, these images are all about meditating on that question. Is there a way for a photograph to be truthful? Is there a way for a drawing of a photograph to be truthful? Because I'm attempting to recreate an image that did exist from a mechanical object that theoretically captured the light waves in a room bouncing back in a way that was truthful. But as the hole punch shows, it maybe was not in that moment. Yeah, I'm going to spin my wheels a little bit on this, but I really feel like this is the most important question of our day today, the question of whether photographs can be reliable, whether videos can be reliable. And you know, it's a bit depressing, I think, sometimes. When I think about this work, I go, well, I'm asking myself this question, but is there any answer to this question? And that brings me back around often to the question I ask myself, which is, why am I making these images? This image already does exist, and there's obviously there's a power to responding to an image and trying to show people an image that maybe was never seen, but there's also sort of a Sisyphean act in the process of rendering an image in this way, because that image does already exist, and I'm sitting there with my pencil and spending hours, hundreds of hours often, drawing wallpaper and a toothbrush. And why do I do that? And especially in the contemporary art world, I think this is a fascinating question, because realism as a process is often sort of looked at as a thing that's been done, and why would we do that again? But for me, it's a meditative act. It's an act that is one where when I enter into the process of drawing, I often don't feel like I understand the image, but by the time I finish, I feel like I understand something about it. And it's a thing that forces me to slow down and respond to an image in a very different way than I would have if I just saw a photograph. We're living in a moment right now where the average person, I just read recently, takes 10 to 20 photographs a day. And if you multiply that out by how many billions of humans are on this planet, it's like 160 billion photographs a day. And so photographs are everywhere, and we're inundated with them, and we're questioning whether they're even worth anything at the same time. And that's a little bit heavy, but I also think it's kind of beautiful, at least for me as an artist, because my own process is about the antithesis of that. It's about this impossible act of trying to respond to this image in a meditative and purposefully slow way, and to think about this image in a way that involves my hands, not just my eyes. And there's something in that process that I think is deeply human and is deeply important, that as we live in this moment where we question these things and where we are inundated by images every day, there's a lot to be learned from that, I think, that meditation and slowing down and using our hands as a way to process these questions might not answer the questions, but it'll bring us somewhere. Thank you very much.